The topic for today is building a culture of security. And I'm joined on today's webinar by Nathan Caldwell, who is our marketing manager and an expert in the cybersecurity culture and education space as well. So, Nathan, greetings and welcome to the webinar.
Thanks so much, Ted. Happy to be here, and I'm excited about this topic.
All right, awesome. Well, we're going to get into it and check in on the agenda here in just a quick moment. But one thing we like to do in all of our presentations is just spend 1 or 2 minutes just introducing who SnapTech is, if there's anybody new on today's presentation. But SnapTech, we are a cybersecurity first managed IT service provider with operations in Atlanta, Georgia, Phoenix, Arizona, and San Francisco, California. Most of our clients have headquarters in those locations, but we serve clients nationwide. Um, our point of view on IT service and support is, we believe that technology should solve problems and not create challenges day to day. I think when we onboard a new client, we often find that they're either frustrated with how technology is getting in the way of their employees' productivity day to day, or they're losing sleep over their cybersecurity posture because they know they're not doing things right, or they're maybe suffering even cyber breaches, or they just feel like they don't have enough strategic direction in where they're taking their IT and cybersecurity. So we try to solve that. And the way we do that is with a proven process that when we bring on a new client, most of the clients who come to us when they're brand new, they don't have a technology plan, they don't have a predictable budget, they're probably not implementing best practices, and we try to get our clients to a place where technology is stable and predictable, and you have a technology plan and you have a budget and you know where you're going over 1 to 5 years. And that allows organizations to really have their employees work from anywhere in a secure fashion. When things do break, or when clients and their users do have questions, they get friendly and fast IT support, and they really get that peace of mind that they're doing cybersecurity right, and that their employees and their intellectual property and their data is secure. So that's a little bit about us and how we serve clients. We really work with clients in two different ways. If you're a smaller company and you don't have an IT department at all, or anyone who has IT on their badge, we deliver what we call fully managed IT, where we'll do everything for the client, a fully outsourced solution. If you're a larger organization and you have an IT director or an IT manager or even a whole IT team, we also can partner with larger organizations and come up with a custom support solution where SnapTech has our own swim lanes where we're taking care of certain aspects of your IT operations, and then the internal team is looking after the other swim lanes. So that's what we call co-managed IT. So that's a little bit about us. Let's get into today's topic. What we're looking to do today is address the topic of building a culture of cybersecurity. And there's a couple different ways to do that. I think it's Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture is one of the hardest things to build and nurture in an organization, and it's also the thing that makes organizations and companies really powerful. When you have a really sound culture, it allows your organization and your people to do amazing things. And in today's world, one of the biggest risks businesses face is the threat of cyber criminals and hackers, and the day-to-day risk of cyber defense and the need for cybersecurity. And it's not about deploying software tools and merely deploying best practices. It's really about everybody in your organization understanding the risks that your organization faces, because the cyber threats are real, and that the weakest link in any organizations are the human beings. And if those human beings can be exploited, the bad guys can social engineer their way into. And so you've really got to make sure that you're building a culture of security, because that is your first line of defense to all of the different challenges that organizations face against cyber criminals. So Nathan and I are going to tag team this topic. I am going to weigh in more on the kind of best practices and technology elements that help build kind of like your superstructure that you need to then go nurture that culture. And then Nathan's going to take the softer side of this, which is really, and the harder part of it, which is really how do you, develop and nurture that culture. So we're going to look at best practices. We're going to look at a couple like what we would consider technology table stakes. These are things your organization must do today. And then Nathan's going to talk about leading by example, leading from the executive team all the way to the front line. How to weave cybersecurity awareness into everything you do, and then what are some things you can if you're doing them today, you're going to kill your culture of security. You're going to kill you're just going to start yourself out on the wrong foot. So Nathan's going to unpack those things as well. So that's today's agenda. Let's get into it. Let's get into the meat of the um, some of these best practices. So um, the very first one, I want to talk about this visual. Building a culture of cybersecurity or a culture of security, it is a journey, not a destination. Um, for anyone who spends time in the outdoors, it's very common that you always have like false summits. Like you think you got to the top of the next mountain, and then you get up to the top of that mountain, and you just look out over, and you're like, "Holy cow! There's more mountains to climb." And building a culture of cybersecurity is a lot like that. I think there's no final destination. There's no time when you can say, um, we've arrived and we don't need to continue to get better. That's never going to exist. But I think the climbing a mountain metaphor is useful because what we see with a lot of organizations is they are down in the valley. They are at the bottom of the hill. They are in a world of hurt. Like because they don't have best practices, because they don't have the right technologies in place, because their management team has not really focused on this to try to raise awareness with their employees, they're in a world of hurt. And sometimes they're suffering real life cyber breaches and attacks and all the financial consequences and pain that happens there. So they're down in the valley. So let's think about this metaphor of the mountain that you just want to keep climbing. You want to get better every day. You're probably going to discover there's more summits to climb when you get to the top of the first summit. Don't worry about it. Just keep going up. So that's kind of like why we have this kind of visual in there. But let's go to the next slide and
Well,
talk about some of these best practices.
I'll just add one thing to the analogy as well. Like you use the term we, and that's really the principle behind it too, is this is an ongoing journey that we are on together. Your organization doesn't just get there by one head of IT or technology wizard who's making decisions, making choices, purchasing technology and implementing it. It's that everyone needs to be checking behind them to make sure that everybody's being brought along. This isn't a free solo type climb. This is a team effort that everybody needs to be moving forward together.
Great point. Great point. So, a couple best practices first. I think the very first thing that organizations and leaders in an organization need to think about is you really need to embrace a cybersecurity framework. There's several different cybersecurity frameworks on the market. There's probably 5 to 10 that are really good. Some of that are in international character, some are which you're kind of US based. But a cybersecurity framework is a standard set of controls and best practices that define what good looks like. And going from good to great is completing your level of completeness of all of those controls. So um, the importance of a framework is that it's a benchmark. It's a neutral third party yardstick that you can measure your organization against and say, do we actually implement these 128 controls that are defined in this framework? And you go through and do an audit of where you stand, and you discover, oh, holy cow, we only comply with 35 of the 128. That's probably going to result in a pretty low score for us. We've got a lot of work to do. So the value of a framework is it's a neutral third party way to assess where you are today and where your maturity is today. At SnapTech, we happen to embrace the NIST cybersecurity framework for most of our client engagements. NIST is a division of the U.S. federal government, like the science and R&D division of the U.S. federal government. And NIST publishes best practices and frameworks in a lot of different industry categories in the area of cybersecurity. The NIST cybersecurity framework is the thing that we think is most relevant, and it basically breaks cybersecurity into these 5 categories of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And that's how you can kind of think about the completeness or maturity of a cyber posture. And we'll kind of explain how we use frameworks to help clients make progress. So that's kind of the very first best practice we'd recommend. The second best practice, or the next best practice, is to leverage third-party cyber risk assessments. If you're a SnapTech client and you're on today's call, you probably have already undergone an assessment by us at some point in your journey with us as a client. But I think whether you're a client of ours or you're not yet a client, or if you're never a client of ours, this principle still applies. Every organization should, at some periodic basis, have a third party come in and assess your cyber posture. Just like any finance or accounting organization should have their bookkeeping audited on a periodic basis, having somebody come in that's a neutral third party and look at your current IT and cybersecurity best practices is extremely healthy. First of all, it makes sure that the fox isn't watching the hen house. I mean, you don't want the people who are closest to the work evaluating and grading their own work. You want a neutral third party to come in and look at it, number one. Number two, when you do an assessment right, you're using a third party framework like the NIST cybersecurity framework. And it's an essential part of a process of doing risk management. And in any organization, you have to think about, we do risk management naturally all the time. We're managing our cash flow, we're managing our bank balances, we're managing our finances so we're profitable, we're pricing our products and services so that we're generating a certain healthy profit margin to feed growth of the organization and returns to investors and so on and so forth. But you also need to think about, running the rest of your organization in a very healthy manner. And an assessment kit is a key part of allowing you to do that. When we do an assessment, there's really 3 parts of the process. We go in and we do a discovery and inventory of all of your IT assets, all of your processes, all of your software and physical assets. Then we often will do kind of like a dynamic risk assessment of the environment using technical tools and looking for threats or vulnerabilities in an environment. And then we collate and analyze all of that data. When we do an assessment, there's literally piles and piles of logs and reports that get generated that we need to collate through and to come up with recommendations and to summarize where a client stands. And then ultimately it results in a score and a list of recommendations. So that's what we do in an assessment. There's lots of different ways to get them done. We don't bring on any new clients as an organization until we do an IT discovery and cyber risk assessment. But let's look at some examples of what comes out of an assessment in the next couple slides. So this is an example of just one of the pages from the exec summary of a risk assessment that we do. So when we use the NIST cybersecurity framework as a benchmark, we go through and we'll score the organization on all their different controls and best practices. And in this particular case, this client is coming in at like a nearly 15-16%. That's a pretty low score. And what you see is that they've got pretty significant gaps in terms of how they kind of inventory and identify and organize all of their IT assets. They have some things in place to protect the organization from cyber attack, but they don't have a lot of more advanced tools to detect if there actually is a breach that's occurred. And they're pretty lean in the respond and recover categories. And so this is, when we do an assessment on an organization, there's no shame in this. It's like, just this is where you are and you can just go forward. It's like, how do we get better? And in the next couple slides, what we then do is we provide recommendations on how to methodically improve your cyber posture. And so sometimes it's upgrading certain physical assets and hardware. Sometimes it's upgrading and adding additional software and cybersecurity tools. And sometimes it's policies and procedures and changes to how you onboard and offboard employees and all that sort of thing. So we're going to come in when we do an assessment. We'll always have a recommendation section. We'll have it in logical buckets. We'll plot those different recommendations over time. What should we do first? What should we do 6 months from now, 12 months from now? And then once we make those recommendations, we also show you on the next slide, um, where that recommendation actually will help turn these categories that are red and yellow on the left column there into green. So once we can flip an at-risk category to, oh yeah, we've now solved that problem, then that becomes in your next assessment green, and your score goes up. And so I don't want to belabor the point, but like the assessment process, if we go to the next slide, it's all about just knowing where you are and having a plan to do methodical improvement. So this is something that kind of needs to happen in parallel with developing your culture, because you need to be adding in new tools. You need to be aware of what the threat ecosystem is in the external market. Paying attention to frameworks is going to keep you aware of what industry standards are, and those industry standards are always evolving. And then by doing an assessment, you get a a third party point of view on how do you improve day to day. The next
Yeah, Ted,
best
a
Yeah.
big part of that culture isn't just that third party, if it's us or not, but it's not about just the third party coming in, taking a look around, and making sure like you check the box on the technology. It's making sure that all the technology is operating as it should, because there are many times that it's discovered that people believe they've purchased backups or they've purchased this different technology, but yet it hasn't been tested or it hasn't been run in a long time. And so even though they may have purchased it, it's not doing what it should be doing. And that's where it can fail. And so you need that mentality of coming in with fresh eyes, taking a look around, testing it all, making sure it's in place and it's working as it should in order to provide the results that you want.
That's a great point, Nathan, and that's a huge thing we see all the time in assessments. I mean, I think for the folks cutting the checks in organizations or approving expenditures, there's always this feeling like, oh, I bought these cybersecurity tools, I'm going to be secure. And the reality is that's like having the right tooling, having the right software investments is only half the battle, because you can buy the tools, but they can be deployed incorrectly, they can be deployed improperly, they can be improperly maintained. I mean, something we see all the time is most organizations have migrated to Microsoft 365. And the reality is if you adopt Microsoft 365 for your email calendar and your cloud collaboration posture, um, if you just deploy the Microsoft defaults, your cybersecurity score is quite low. So, like, that's an area where in many cases, organizations have licensed the right tools and capabilities from Microsoft. But if you haven't done a proper hardening of the Microsoft 365 environment, you're leaving a ton of value on the table in terms of what you can do for your cyber defense. And that's something we're always going to catch during our assessment process. But if we change gears, the next kind of best practice is just to be compliant aware. Um, Depending on your industry, some industries are lightly regulated, some industries are heavily regulated. So if you're in medical, there's HIPAA. If you do a lot of transactions via credit cards, you need to be PCI compliant. Um, and the list goes on and on and on, depending on your vertical. And all I would encourage you is that to really make sure that compliance awareness is a big part of your risk management and approach, and it's a big part of how you build that culture of security. That it has to be it's a pillar. It has to be a pillar of your approach, and it starts with awareness at the executive level, and it also requires not a checkbox mentality. Like you don't just go through and try to do the letter of the law. You have to really capture the spirit of the law, like why do these regulations exist for your industry, and you really want to tackle that, because otherwise you're just phoning it in, and you're going to leave yourself vulnerable if you're not taking compliance seriously.
I
So
love that you said it. Compliance is not a checkbox, and yet our image is checkboxes. But that's
there's
because you do have to prove, or you do have to be held accountable to that standard. And so there is a matter of accomplishing it and proving it. But don't just stop at that bare minimum, because the compliance standards only go so far. And so, in order to actually build a culture, it's not just the mentality of let's just check the box, let's do the bare minimum, let's do what we have to do to get by. It's a matter of making sure that you are on that cybersecurity journey that we mentioned in the analogy.
yeah. Let's go. So let's keep trucking here. Okay. Another. This is more of like a principle that really needs to be kind of led from the top, and it's the idea of principle of least privilege. We come into organizations all the time where we see, you know, it's incredibly flat. Everybody has access to everything. And it's, often because, companies grow quickly, there's a high degree of trust when you're smaller. Like, wait, we know all of our employees. They wouldn't like look at any files that they shouldn't go look at, or they wouldn't, Sally in accounting wouldn't go steal all those files and take them, put them on her, a thumb drive and take them out of the organization. And we see that all the time. And then organizations grow, and then all of a sudden they are no longer 15 people, they're 85 people. And there's a lot of employees, and they haven't really thought through how you properly go organize and govern your data and govern your IT permissions. And so companies should grant access to technology to their workforce on the principle of least privilege, which is you basically start with like a clean slate and you basically say nobody has access to anything, right? And then we're going to go back and only grant you access to the file server that you need access to the particular folders on the file server that you need permission to do your job, to grant you access to a particular software tool because you actually need to do that for your job. And you only grant your employees access to things that they absolutely necessarily need to do their job, because that reduces your attack surface. If you're a hacker and you attack some very junior employee and discover that that junior employee has admin access to your most important software tool, it's a big day for that hacker. That it's a bonanza for them, and it's a really bad day for your organization. And we see this all the time, that organizations are sloppy and careless and forgetful, and it's because when you're dealing with growth, you forget about these things. So if you're not implementing the principle of least privilege, you probably have a lot of cleanup work to do. If you're growing and you want to get bigger, just you have to have this as a principle in how you organize access to IT systems and software and data in your organization. Um, okay, let's keep. All right, so that's it on kind of like principles. Like those are big principles that we think leadership teams should embrace. Let's talk about a couple technology um, decisions and tools that we think are table stakes, and then I'm going to hand the ball to Nathan. So let's go to the next slide and just talk about some of those table stake items.
Ted, before we jump into the technology, we do have a question from the audience.
Okay.
And so kind of going along with our third-party risk assessments that SnapTech IT provides, and then ongoing managed services or co-managed IT. The question is, what can your service offer to a company with a well-established cybersecurity team?
Well, I think as kind of we mentioned earlier, there you always need to be getting better. You always need to be raising the bar. And even if you feel like, if we just go back through the principles we just covered and you go, yeah, we do principle of least privilege. Yeah, we're very compliance focused. If you can go back and say, hey, yes to a lot of those things, then the next question is actually have you audited it? Have you actually had, are you actually audited? You think you're in a good spot, but have you actually had a third party assessment done? We do something every year that's called, we're what we call SOC 2 Type 2 certified. And you see that SOC 2 Type 2 certification, only a very few number of managed service providers have SOC 2 Type 2 certification. What you'll see is a lot of the larger software companies in the world are SOC 2 Type 2 because it's very difficult. But what that involves is every year you have a third party audit of your environment, um, by third party auditors, and they come in and inspect all of your controls, all of your training programs, all of your policies and procedures, and they validate that you're actually walking the talk and doing what you have documented, and that you can actually prove to them via the audit trail that you actually have been doing those things. So like that's for a lot of organizations that kind of feel like they're in a really good spot. If you can scrutinize yourself with like third party audits and that sort of thing, that's a great next step forward. And then what I would say as well is the cybersecurity market is super deep, and there's always more you can do. And having a partner like Snaptech to be your advisor on taking things to another level is where some of our larger, more sophisticated clients really look to us for help.
All right, thanks so much. All right, let's jump into this, embracing effective cybersecurity technology.
Yes. So let's just talk about defense in depth just for a moment. I'm going to try to go quick on this. Defense in depth is a fundamental principle that we use to manage how we deploy cybersecurity tools to our clients. The whole principle, it's not a new concept. If you look at a castle, um, there's multiple layers of defense. Castles were built to protect the riches of the kingdom or protect the king and queen, up in the tower in the middle of the castle. And you had multiple layers of defense: the moat, the drawbridge, the boiling oil being poured out by the knights from the towers. All of these things were to keep the bad guys out, and having multiple layers of protection in your defenses. And if you go to the next slide, we still implement these sorts of principles in our day-to-day lives, of course. Like if you just think about how we protect our households today, you might choose to live in a gated community. You might be involved in organizing a neighborhood watch so that you have a community of looking out for the neighborhood and looking and being concerned about the security. You might be following up with the city council to make sure that the city lights are maintained. You may put security cameras in your own home. You may have an alarm system that not only alarms if the doors are breached, but has motion detectors inside that are going to monitor if somebody actually breaches one of those doors, that you actually detect them. And then you have rapid response from a security company or the police to come to your home. And then last but not least, you better have your karate lessons, right? So if you need to go hand-to-hand combat at the end. But this principle is real in our day-to-day lives. And the way we do defense in depth is we use the NIST cybersecurity framework, and we have different capabilities and technologies that we'll deploy to clients that meet some of the different requirements in the different areas of the NIST cybersecurity framework. So identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And what I want to do on this slide is just mention a couple of these that we consider table stakes. If you look kind of in the middle of the middle of protect 2 there, you see multi-factor authentication. This is something we think is just fundamental. Multi-factor authentication is proving that you as a user, when you log into a system, that you are who you say you are. And the way we do that is to prove that something that which is the password, and something that you have. And that something that you have is often like a one-time password or a token that generates a one-time password that proves that you are who you say you are. And in today's world, those one-time passwords are produced by your mobile device, which was connected to the system at the beginning, so you can validate that you are who you say you are. So we use authentication applications on a phone to generate a one-time passcode in combination with your password that and that's the surest way. I mean, Microsoft's done some pretty good studies on this, where like if you have MFA deployed, you reduce your risk factor by like 90% in most situations. Because if a hacker actually breaches breaches the credential or obtains the credentials from one of your employees, the username and password, they still can't get in because they don't have the one-time password or the token that proves who you say you are. So MFA is one of those things where we sometimes come across leadership teams where they're like, "Oh well, the CFO, he just hated it, So he told us to turn it off. And we're like, what? Are you crazy? Like, no, no, that is not building a culture of cybersecurity. You need to have multi factor authentication enabled on all of your core applications across the organization. So that's one that we feel like is a table stake. It needs
Yeah,
to be
and the
trained. Go
Oh,
ahead,
there
Nathan.
you go. Yeah, you're getting right at it. It needs to be trained on. Like it's not enough to just to purchase that technology and then have your employees set it up, make sure it's working, and then walk away. They need to understand what is it there for? How do they properly interact with it? What are the red flags that they should be watching out for if a bad guy is trying to circumvent it? You know, there's MFA push bombing where somebody could get an alert over and over and over and over to approve MFA. They might just throw their hands up in the air and say, whatever, fine. Or, you know, we're often trained to swipe away. Like my kids will borrow my wife's phone to play PBS Kids video games on it. And if a text message comes in, they know how to swipe away. And so you just never know. Like if we're trained to say, get out of my way, I gotta grow my crops here in Farmville or whatever you're playing. Somebody could swipe away that MFA authentication if they're getting that bombing. And so we need to make sure that the culture piece isn't just buying the technology, but that everybody understands what it is, they understand how to interact with it properly, and they understand how to avoid the scams or the ways that the bad guys would try to circumvent that technology.
That's right. And also I mean, that's a great point, Nathan. And the other thing that's a part of that training is the why. Like
Oh,
why,
huge.
like why do we if employees understood the implications of or how common it is that credentials are breached through social engineering attacks, and if they're really well educated on what the downside is and how frequent it is and how easy it is for people to be socially engineered, then the whole MFA piece just is like, this is like, just hydrating my body. It's like I must do this. This is like
Mm.
essential for our health. And so don't underestimate just spending some time talking about the why with your people as well to build that culture
Yeah,
of security.
because if you don't fill in that blank space of answering why it's important, your employees will do it for themselves. They'll be asking, like, why is this important? Oh, it's just a hassle. It's just another hoop to jump
Right,
through. Well, no, no,
right,
it serves a very important security purpose.
right. So one last comment on kind of like tech. Um, what we see very commonly when we bring on new clients is that they might have, a lot of protections in their organization in the form of antivirus running on, workstations, laptops, and servers. They might have a firewall in place. But what people often don't have is the stuff that you find in that detect category. And detect, I like to always come back to our analogy of that defense in depth and a household. If you think about it like a home's like doors and windows that are locked is the protections to keep the bad guys out. The motion detector inside the house when you have an alarm system is like what we talk about with detection. It basically assumes sometimes I might get breached and they might actually break a window, get into the house, and they might break the window and the little sensor that they don't move the window so the sensor doesn't go off, but then they come in and then the motion detector detects them. A lot of the cybersecurity technologies that are in that detect category behave in this very similar way. It assumes that like one of your employees is going to get their credentials to Microsoft 365 breached, but we're going to have technology like SaaS alerts looking at our Microsoft 365 environment. If anyone outside the United States tries to log in to our Microsoft 365 environment, we're going to alert you proactively with this technology because we have no employees outside the United States. So we're going to have technologies that are acting like that motion detector. And it's all about having a rapid response when something goes bad to mitigate the damage and to quarantine the bad guys and then kick them out. So detection is an area, things like managed detection and response, cloud monitoring are areas where we're always helping clients beef up their investments. So I think it's about time for me to kind of turn things over to Nathan and kind of talk about how to take things to the next level in terms of enriching that culture.
Yeah, and so just one final comment too on the culture side of this technology and making sure that employees understand how it works, how they interact with it, also what it's doing for them, what it's not doing for them is, I love to talk about email filtering because oftentimes employees will think, oh, we have email security, we have a tech team, they're monitoring my inbox is a safe place where I can go to just open up anything and click on any offer that I want to. But that's not the case. So employees do need to know that when you are implementing any type of technology that doesn't necessarily require them to, like with email filtering, they don't have to hit a button to turn on email filtering every day they come in before they check their email inbox. It's running. However, they do need to know what they need to do with it. And Ted, when you and I were discussing this the other day, you brought up some great points. They need to know that they also should be monitoring their spam box, that they should
Yeah.
be monitoring their filter inbox, because guess what? The filters, they're good, but they aren't perfect. And so you might get some legitimate emails that end up in there that cause an interruption for work. And so you need the intelligence of your employees checking it out, making sure that they are being careful and cautious and determining whether an email can be trusted or not, whether it's in their inbox or whether they're going to their spam folder or the email filter folder and checking those out there.
Yeah,
And
all of
so
this
that
technology, all of this tech needs buy-in of your people, intelligent operation at all levels of the organization with the tools, and a good understanding of why the tools are in place and how to properly interact with them. And that's the hardest part. That's really the hardest part, is getting that level of awareness and buy-in across your whole organization.
Yeah, and that goes back to that analogy that we were talking about, that everybody needs to be coming along on this journey with you, that you can't just make decisions in a box and not tell anybody. You got to provide that training and that helpfulness to bring people along so they understand how to interact with it and what it's doing for them, and also to watch out for any dangers that the bad guys might try to pull, so that they can spot those and report those. All right, so let's get into the human side of security. We need to take a look at, as you described it, they are a layer of defense, everybody in the organization, and they also are called upon to interact with our technology. And so no matter how careful you are at locking down technology to make it as secure as absolutely possible, they could still give away the keys to the kingdom. And if the bad guys get the actual username, they get the actual password, or they get the approval through MFA and they can walk right in, well, then they might go undetected. And so it's very important that we bring our people along for this. And so part of building that culture is to make sure that we're leading by example. And so we want to make sure that no one is exempt. There's so many times back when I was in the field of cybersecurity awareness training, there were so many companies that would say, hey, we want to do our training program, we want to do phishing simulations, but we want to exclude our executives from receiving anything. And that is a dangerous, dangerous game to play, because guess who's going to be legitimately targeted on a grand scale are the leaders, because they are the ones, they call it whaling, where you're going after the big seat in order to obtain those credentials, and therefore you can convince a whole lot more people if you get the actual credentials of a leader in the company and send people an urgent message that says, hey, I need you to do this thing for me right now. Also, if the leaders don't go through with the training, if the leaders don't state that they are employing the security best practices and they avoid it, well, guess what? The employees are going to be saying, like, who cares? They don't even do it. It doesn't matter. No one cares. And you don't want to be building that type of culture. You want to lead by example. And then another way to lead by example is also making sure that you're fostering a safe reporting environment. What that means is if you have non-technical people coming to your technical people and saying, hey, I spotted something, I think it's suspicious, I'm not sure. If they get shamed or they get called dumb, or it's like that Saturday Night Live skit with Jimmy Fallon where he's the IT guy and he comes up to their desk and he's just like, move. Like, if that's the tone that is delivered to your employees, or if they make a mistake, they accidentally click something and they reach out and say, hey, I don't know why I did it. I was suspicious, but then I clicked it anyway. I need you to know about this. If you shame them, if you tell them that they're dumb, guess what happens next time they possibly make a mistake? They aren't coming to you. They aren't telling you. And then you give the bad guys ample time to get in and do whatever they want uh, because it's not getting reported. And so you need to make sure that you are fostering that safe reporting environment. Additionally, make sure that you're providing effective cybersecurity awareness training. And the principle here about building a culture of cybersecurity is to teach, not just trick. Now, the reason why I say that is because many organizations, they will combine education and phishing simulations in order to train their employees. But at a certain point, sometimes, you know, the tech people who are operating those phishing simulations, they depart from their original intent to educate people, and they start to think like, ooh, that was too easy. Everybody spotted it. So let's get trickier and let's get trickier until you cross a line and you're sending legitimate emails to your employees and really taking advantage of them in a terrible way. There's many companies who've gotten in hot water for this. GoDaddy a couple years ago, they got in hot water for this because they were promising Christmas or holiday bonuses in their phishing emails to their employees when the company was in no spot to do so. And so it just threw employees up in arms. And you might be thinking, well, hey, but that's a great test, because wouldn't the bad guys offer that? Yes, that's true. It is a tempting offer that the bad guys may use, but because it was coming from the GoDaddy team, they had so much internal knowledge and access that it didn't come across as an actual phishing simulation. It came across as a legitimate email. And so it got them in a ton of hot water. So you want to stay with the principle of we are here to teach people. And that means that if you are doing phishing simulations and people do click on it, show them where they went wrong. What did they miss out on? Don't just let go off into a void and then be like, all right, let's punish this person. Make sure you're helping to coach them up so they know what to watch out for. Now, we do have a couple of recommendations or places you can go. There are so many security awareness training companies out there, but there are some companies that do offer some free training right off the bat that you can go and grab right now. CISA.gov, every year they develop Cybersecurity Awareness Month themes. So this time of year in October, they're producing content that you can go and get and you can use in your organization. At Snaptech IT, we utilize KnowBe4. Ninjao's another great company. They do micro learning. They have Hollywood actors that are producing, that are voicing these animated characters. And there's so many, many more that I won't go into listing all of them. But the idea behind it is make sure that you have the heart of a teacher, that you're using these to actually bring people to better people, not just trick them and then report back on how many people failed. So when we go into this topic of what should you teach first, well, CISA.gov, they have issued a handful of videos. It's on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and just search CISA.gov, you're going to come across these videos. There's 4 easy ways to stay safe online. They recommend this video where it's talking about strong passwords, MFA we were talking about earlier, staying safe with updating your software, easy tips to avoid phishing scams. All 4 of these videos are excellent to share with employees. They can utilize them in their work life and also their personal life. It can be very advantageous for them to remain secure. And then also they have this fantastic, if you're an 80s baby, you're gonna love this music video because it is just dripping with schoolhouse rock vibes. And they got a character called Joan the Phone. Ted, you were just losing your mind when they came out with Joan the Phone. You were like, Nathan, they got Joan the Phone, and you made me buy you a T-shirt for your birthday with Joan the Phone on it, and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, the singer sounds a lot like Katy Perry, so I'm on board with that music video. But there's plenty of resources out there to start down the path of helping your people remain more secure and to get their heads wrapped around what these principles can do, how they can protect them, how they should interact with them. Now, let's get into a couple years ago, I wrote an article, 5 Ways to Kill a Culture of Cybersecurity, and it was printed on Inc.com. And these are 5 culture killers. And so we wanted to go through them because, we can tell you all of the things you could do. And then at the end of the day, you could be undermining everything you're trying to do with embracing cybersecurity best practices, cybersecurity technology. If you do these things, you're going to undermine them. So let's take a look at this first one, infrequent training. This person says, welcome aboard. Today is the only day you'll ever have cybersecurity training. Now that is what some organizations do. Other organizations are only doing it once a year. Ted, I got a question for you. Okay, you got a couple of kids, all right? Let's say your kids wanted piano lessons. What would be the frequency you would not select? Okay, multiple choice. What would be the frequency you would not select? Annual piano lessons or weekly piano lessons?
Yeah, I would not select annual piano lessons.
Right,
Yeah.
because you're gonna forget what you learned, and there's absolutely no way to build on that skill set if you're going a year in between lessons. The only person, okay, there's a flaw to my analogy, because Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, he was repeating Groundhog Day over and over and over, and so technically they were annual piano lessons, and he became like so proficient. But that's the only catch, right? No one else would sign up for annual piano lessons because you just disengage with the topic.
Well,
Same
but
with
the
cybersecurity
reality
training.
is still a lot of organizations that do annual cybersecurity training,
Yep.
and
Yep.
all of it is forgotten within hours or days of that annual training. So,
Absolutely. Another one is drink from the fire hose training. This is where you would think, okay, let's get everybody in a room. We're going to spend a few hours or a couple of days and just brain dump everything that they could possibly need to know about cybersecurity so that they can be ready to go. And oftentimes this is done during onboarding with employees where their head isn't even wrapped around the company that they're working for yet, and you're throwing a ton of technical information their way. If this is the mode, you are going to kill a culture of cybersecurity, because the way the human brain works is we can only absorb so much in a certain amount of time. And then immediately, as soon as we walk out of that room, our brain is saying, what am I allowed to forget? Because we can't possibly store it all. And so you need that ongoing, you need that retouch, you need that top of mind training. And it doesn't just come with cybersecurity awareness training, it comes in your team meetings, it comes in your onboarding, it comes in your weekly emails, that everybody is making sure that everyone else is staying on top of these cybersecurity best practices. When you open up a new project, is there discussion over how you are going to keep the files secure, how you're going to keep the communication about that project secure? When you onboard a new client, are you talking about how you're going to keep that client's information secure? This is all part of building that culture of cybersecurity. And we mentioned this before. Don't go shaming learners. That's the way you're going to completely undermine it. Because, like we said, people are going to just say, like, okay, then I'm never going to you if I ever encounter something, because I don't want to get yelled at. I don't want to get in trouble. And so you need to keep that out of your culture. Also, creating a culture of distrust. Now, you might be thinking, no one wakes up in the morning and says, hey, let me build a culture of distrust. But let me give you a couple of simple ways that this could happen. And employees could then turn around and say, they don't care about this. Why should I? Think of sending out your cybersecurity awareness training to your employees. You start by saying, hey, welcome aboard. You're going to get some training when we onboard you, and then we're going to do it quarterly. And then you slip on the second quarter and it doesn't go out, or the third quarter, or you kind of forget about it and then you're scrambling and you're like, hey, everybody, quick, emergency, we're about to get audited, or we have to get this up to speed. So everybody needs to complete it by the end of the week. If that's the case, you're building this culture of distrust where you said one thing, but you're delivering another, and you're showcasing that you just don't care that much about it. Because really, the only way to show you care about something is how you prioritize that. If you're allowing it to slip by the wayside, then there's just no priority over it. Or culture of distrust, if you're saying, hey, these are cybersecurity best practices, but then you have people circumventing it, you have leaders saying, oh, that's not for me, doesn't matter, I need to cut a corner, then you're building that culture of distrust. And so watch out for that. Don't do it. You're going to kill that culture of cybersecurity if that's how you handle this. Also, merely checking a box. You're like, hey, and we mentioned this with compliance. Well, we need something, so anything's better than nothing. No, it's not. You need to be thoughtful about this. You need to choose technology. You need to choose cybersecurity best practices. You need to choose ways that you are going to hold people accountable with strategy, understanding where it's going to take you along that path, along that journey to hardening your cybersecurity, to building that culture of cybersecurity. Don't just check a box and move on and say, we got something. You need to make sure that it's effective. You need to make sure that it is embraced by everyone from the top down so that you can be building that culture of cybersecurity. So then ultimately, what does it look like? Well, all of your people, all of your practices, all of your technology working together, going in the same direction to reduce risk and increase resiliency. And that's how you're going to achieve building that culture of cybersecurity. Now, we have a couple of offers for you. We want to, if anybody found this topic very interesting, if you have additional questions for SnapTech IT, you can book an appointment. If you're wondering, hey, how do I want to figure out that risk assessment and what it looks like for my organization, you can book an appointment for that with the QR code here on your left or on your right. We also have another live webinar coming up where we're going to be taking about a look at Life Hack My Microsoft 365. And so a lot of tips and tricks, a lot of people, there's tons of features in Microsoft 365 that may go unnoticed by you, and you can ramp up your skill set with that if you want to get registered there. I'm going to take a look and see, we don't have any additional questions, but Ted, the mic over to you. Anything additional to add or to chime in on here?
I was thinking just one thing. I don't want to be a buzzkill here at the end, but one thing we didn't really talk about is budget. Budget and investment in cybersecurity. I think we would be lying to ourselves if we didn't acknowledge that is one of the biggest frustrations a lot of leaders have, is kind of they feel every time they turn around that there's more things to spend money on in the cybersecurity arena. So we really appreciate the pain there, and we live it every day on the journey that our clients are on. And what I would just recommend to everyone is you don't just try to stiff arm that or like push back against that. Try to engage in a process to really understand where you need to make investments now and in the future, because the it can be overwhelming sometimes when you address like how poorly maybe you've managed cybersecurity in the past. Like you can build up a lot of technical debt, meaning you've got bills to pay, you've deferred maintenance, you haven't made investments in the past, and so you need to do a catch up. But I think one of the realities of managing cybersecurity and building this culture of security is building like your risk management muscle mass as a leadership team. And what that means is it's not just about dumping money out the door to fix a problem. It's about having a methodical plan to mitigate your risks. There's always more problems to solve than money exists in the budget. That's just anybody who's in a leadership position knows that's the case. But if you do it in a thoughtful sort of way, if you have a risk assessment, if you're being compliance minded, if you have a third party assessment done, then you have all the facts on the table, which then allows you to make a more methodical plan on actually how you're going to deploy financial resources to mitigate your biggest risks first, and then raise the bar over time when funds are available and when budgets might be a little richer down the road. So just remember that investment and budgets are a big part of the equation here. Don't just check the boxes and go through the motions, because that's not going to get you there, and you're not going to really be solving the core challenges. But just being methodical about budgeting and risk management is a key part of kind of addressing this problem in a responsible sort of way. That's, I think,
Yeah,
what,
and
you know,
and the culture side of the budget too is it's not just about throwing money at the problem and buying the next technology. It's making sure that you are embracing the tools, that you're strategically thinking about those tools and putting your money in the highest value areas, and then implementing them in an effective way so that it does what you're hoping it to do, rather than ending up being money spent and shelfware sitting on the shelf, you know? And so making sure that you are thinking about that from a culture standpoint and implementing effectively.
because that's how you get the ROI. That's how the return on investment of those dollars make a real difference. Is if your employees are really embracing a culture of security, they're the first line of defense, and organizations that have employees that have a healthy, robust culture around security are the ones that are going to have the least cybersecurity incidents and problems. There's no doubt. Um, so let me just kind of wrap with a plug. The Life Hack, our Microsoft 365 webinar next month, will have a healthy amount of Copilot tips and tricks. So Microsoft Copilot is Microsoft's innovation in the areas of generative artificial intelligence and AI. And so tune in for that. And also, we've got two more of our Copilot lunch and learns that we're hosting in Phoenix in the San Francisco Bay Area coming up in the next 3 weeks. So check out the snaptechit.com website if you're interested in registering for either of those lunch and learns. But with that, Nathan, thank you very much for organizing today's session. It was great to spend some time on this important topic.
Yeah, appreciate it, Ted. Thanks so much, and love co-hosting with you. And appreciate our audience joining us and also the questions that were submitted. Thank you so much.
Okay, take care, everybody.